Welcome back to the show. Did you know that the second most popular girls' sport nationwide is volleyball? And it's not just a sport reserved for high school athletes. Some of the top women's volleyball programs on the collegiate level have been garnering attention for a lot of years. Nebraska, Texas, Stanford, Kansas, I'd throw in there. I used to work in Kansas actually, and I covered Division II athletics. And Washburn and Emporia State, they were two of the perennial powers in D2. They called it the Turnpike Tussle. Women's volleyball, has had attention in certain, it's more popular in certain regions. But in January, we were introduced to MLV, Major League Volleyball. It's an upstart league. They got financial backing of more than $100 million to get off the ground. And the reception thus far has been great. And I wouldn't call it the emergence of pro volleyball, but almost a reemergence into a national spotlight for professional volleyball. Now you can see these top tier collegiate programs funneling into pro volleyball. There's an appetite for it. Media exposure has increased visibility. Networks believe there is appeal. Sportscaster Ciara Brooke, she's from Ferris State University, and she has that story.
I wanted to talk a little bit about women's professional volleyball. And because we're seeing right now, there's a huge spike, there's a huge demand that just didn't come out of nowhere. When 92,000 people show up at a women's college volleyball match, that's a huge deal. And that's just not a headline, but that's a huge demand for people. Right now, that's just a sport telling you that it's ready to be seen and recognized by people. People in the volleyball world have been saying the same thing for years now, that this was 50 years in the making and that this was something that has been just kind of under the vision of a lot of people. And the next step would be the professional level. But volleyball has been woven into schools, into collegiate athletes now. And especially after the passing of Title IX, that's when it really got into the real investment of women's sports. There's now scholarships, there's facilities, there's amazing coaching staff around the country that's helped volleyball become one of the most reliable pipelines for women athletes now in the country. Title IX has been expanding opportunities for women for years now. It's challenging old stereotypes. Like I said, it's creating funding for a lot of women athletes that people didn't think was possible and creating reliable careers as well for women athletes, and it's slowly changing the landscape. Suddenly, girls nowadays know that this is something that they can compete in at the collegiate level and at the pro athlete level. And there's a lot of people, a lot of mothers even, that didn't think that this was possible. And I think it's just a really amazing thing that there's such a demand now for women athletes, especially in the volleyball world. That's why today volleyball is the second most popular girls' high school sport in the country. And I just don't think that happened randomly. Like I said, this was something that's been 50 years in the making, and it's easy to pick up, it's competitive, and it's been woven into a lot of local communities. Club volleyball took its start in high school and then pushed it even further, and then turning that sport into something that athletes can play in at the collegiate or the pro level. And there's recruiting opportunities, there's big tournaments, there's, like I said, a high demand for women's volleyball now. And now there's an avenue for people to go, and for women and even men sometimes, for women to go to play for the pro athletes. Programs like Nebraska, Stanford, Texas, Wisconsin, they just don't win matches, but they have been creating brands. They are known as the volleyball states. Nebraska is known as the volleyball state. When, like I said, 92,000 people show up at one match, that's creating demand for seeing that sport. The atmospheres are loud, the rivalries are intense, the fan bases are super loyal, and like I said, volleyball has been quietly kind of under the rug. It's been kind of swept under the rug, but now there's such a demand for it. And now it's just not proving that people are playing, but they're watching it. Diane Mendenhall, who is a former volleyball star in Ogallala, said she has never seen an atmosphere like this before in her life. She's now the president of the Omaha Supernovas, and she was a part of that 92,000 crowd that was in Nebraska. And she said it was truly an entire town embracing the sport and a representation of who Nebraskan people are. This really explains why Nebraska supports athletics so strongly, especially women's athletics. When you have a state and a town that truly support collegiate athletes and also people who play at the pro athlete level, it really just comes down to community pride. And a lot of people are so super invested in Nebraska volleyball, and it's become such a big deal because it's not now just a sport, but it's something that the whole town can rally around, and it means something to this town. For years now, I don't think there was ever a question about volleyball being a popular sport. I just think it was more of a question as to where the funding was and where the opportunity was for collegiate athletes to go into the pro athlete level. A lot of pro athletes had to go into the overseas to travel and go into Europe and to Asia to play at the pro athlete level. Especially now, the US financial hurdles, there's a lot of it's high cost to travel even, and it's expensive just to even produce a volleyball match anyways. And even volleyball back then had a hard time producing money just to advertise for themselves and to also just generate ticket sales as well. A lot of those players at the collegiate athlete level who wanted to go in place at that pro athlete level, they had to go into Asia and European countries and be far away from family and friends and even from their fans here in the States. And that was always just a tough situation. But that's what's changing right now. There are so many different pro athlete leagues now. The Pro Volleyball Federation opened its season in Omaha in front of more than 11,000 people, which is setting a U.S. attendance record for women's pro volleyball. And that, I think, immediately proves that there is such a demand for this and that people are willing to show up and to take pride in volleyball now. The Omaha Supernovas have continued that momentum, averaging around 10,000 people per home match, which I think is amazing. And it just, like I said, it's just having that. I just think it's having people recognize you and having that sense of pride in your community that really, really helps the places like the Pro Volleyball Federation that that's what they're here for, that's their mission, and they want to try to help pro athletes get to that level, especially here in the States. I also think media exposure now, CBS Sports have really took a huge dive into this. That kind of visibility, especially on CBS Sports, signals that networks believe volleyball can draw major attention and also pinpoint sports audiences who want maybe to try something different. And it's not just to these like niche little fans. I don't think women's volleyball, pro volleyball especially, isn't being just created from scratch, but it's already kind of catching up to where the sport was initially. It was 50 years ago, like I said, ticket sales were not that popular. It wasn't a super popular sport, but now places like Nebraska, Wisconsin, Texas have all really, really helped build a brand for volleyball. And I think that passion was proven in college. I think the credibility was proven from the Olympics. What was missing was just the structure and the opportunity at the professional level. I think if pro women's volleyball succeeds, which I have no doubt it's going to, it does become a blueprint. It's a blueprint for other emerging sports, places maybe like lacrosse, swim, softball. They can transition whatever volleyball has done in these past couple of years and implement it and create also professional athletes from those other sports that also don't get a lot of recognition as well.
That was Ciara Brooke from Ferris State. And I like how she mentioned, how volleyball can almost act as a template for other niche sports to gain recognition and exposure. And now more than ever, with so many different entities getting involved in sports production, streaming platforms and the like, there's a way to consume these sports that aren't, the four major sports that wouldn't have been possible, even a handful of years ago, certainly 10, 12 years ago. But now there is an appetite for it. Women's sports very strong nationwide. Again, just on this show, we talked about, the WNBA, obviously professional basketball, and now maybe we'll start to get more name recognition for pro volleyball in the Major League Volleyball, which is underway. All right, I want to thank all our guests on today's show, our Sportscaster contributors, as we talked about Detroit Tigers baseball. I know everybody's itching to see the boys back in uniform, putting on the Old English D. Mayor Mel Kuhn, Andrew Hollinshead from Ann Arbor Pioneer High School, thoughtful dialogue on that. Emily Wisniewski, she's a University of Georgia alum. She's in the Sportscaster program talking about WNBA and how fashion ties into it all. And then, of course, Ciara Brooke from Ferris State University about women's professional volleyball. So a lot that we tackled this week. Hope you learned or gleaned a little something, as we hope you always do when you tune into Open Mic here on WJR. And just a reminder, we come on every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. I'm your host, Johnny Kane. We thank you for listening. And until next time, Godspeed.